Hello and welcome to the Curator of Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage here on Monocle Radio, with highlights from our studios here in Midori House and from around the world. This week,
we learned that though it may feel like we have, as a species, done little with the last decade or so other than listen to Donald Trump, we should have listened to him earlier.
Andrew Muller will be our guide to the last 7 days in what we learned. Plus, we'll take a closer look at one of the most extraordinary prisoner swaps in history.
One of the really fascinating things about this world, and it's this hidden world of diplomacy that lurks just beneath the surface. There are these extraordinary characters everywhere. The deep cover spies, the ordinary families, celebrities, some of the top executives from Silicon Valley, playing a back-channel role, often moving messages between Moscow and Washington.
All that and much more in the next hour here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We begin this week's show with Andrew Muller's weekly humorous roundup, that is, What We Learned.
We learned this week that the UK's Conservative Party, having spent a goodly proportion of this century demonstrating that they were unable to govern Britain, are also incapable of spelling it.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Tell me more.
Let's see where this goes.
We learned this from the wrapping of one of the freebies distributed to the meagre crew of gaunt, cobweb-covered weirdos who turned up at the Tories conference in Manchester, on current trajectory possibly the last such gathering before the one involving queuing resignedly for ladles of tainted Kool-Aid. Specifically, we learned that the proofreading of a wrapper of a conference-branded confectionery may have lapsed towards the lackadaisical.
This is a bar of chocolate. Thank you so much, Tories. When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. That is signed by Kemi Badenoch.
We learned that, yes, one reform of Britain that the Conservatives had proved capable of enacting, if only inadvertently, was slightly renaming it from Britain to Britian. Diligent as ever in our research, we at the What We Learned monologue on Monocle Radio put this refinement to a focus group.
Britian.
Britain.
Britain?
Wow.
Great Britain.
That's a great idea.
Actually, maybe.
Yeah, that's
actually,
right.
That could be something.
What about Great Brian?
But even moving away from Great Britain, or if you will, the untied kindgum of Gerat Britian and Neathorn Iridnal, we learned that the global libertarian project was struggling somewhat with reality and indeed melody. We learned this from, yes, Argentina, specifically from Argentina's president, Javier Milei, who launched his latest book by taking the lead singer role in some sort of rock and roll concert.
Oh, no.
Afraid so. Appropriately, indeed possibly inevitably for someone who has always cultivated the haircut and leather jacket of the angry divorcee who plays the Jean-Jacques Burnel role in Buenos Aires' 7th Best Stranglers tribute act, President Milei subjected a crowd large enough to prompt speculation that the doors were bolted on the outside to an hour-long set of Argentinian rock standards, from which we learned that there is an hour's worth of Argentinian rock standards. At least one of which we learned sounds like this, at least when Milei sings it. Mallet. Is the original any better? No, it is not. Anyway, we learned that President Milei was seeking to incite interest in his new book, The Construction of the Miracle, a celebration of his economic plan, which, in absolutely glorious timing, hits the bargain bins just as Argentina has been compelled to seek a $20 billion bailout from the United States. So we learned, or at least surmised, that purchasers of Milei's book may be more likely, and would certainly be better advised, to burn it for warmth than read it. But sticking with the subject of presidents who have published book-length overestimations of their own expertise, We learned that though it may feel like we have, as a species, done little with the last decade or so other than listen to Donald Trump, we should have listened to him earlier.
There's a page in there devoted to the fact that I saw somebody named Osama bin Laden, and I didn't like it, and you got to take care of him. They didn't do it. A year later, he blew up the World Trade Center, so we've got to take a little credit because nobody else is going to give it to me.
We learned, however, when we checked back on our copy of the book in question, which did involve extracting it from beneath the wobbly leg of the desk, that is how seriously we take our fact-checking, that this claim may not have been, strictly speaking, true, and may have been, strictly speaking, bollocks. We learned from leafing through our copy of the 2000 published The America We Deserve, quite the fate-tempting title in hindsight. Can I get some general muttered agreement?
I think so.
That while it does contain a single mention of Osama bin Laden, it does not identify him as any singular threat, and nor at any rate was this any particularly piercing insight, bin Laden having been on the FBI's most wanted list since the year prior to publication. In fairness, however, it is difficult to blame Donald Trump for this misapprehension of the contents of The America We Deserve by Donald Trump. It's not like he's ever read it. But we learned that Trump's administration, in its pursuit of America's vicious, ruthless and imaginary enemies within, remains dauntless, and that no member of it is burdened by less daunt than White House Deputy Chief of Staff and almost heartbreakingly inevitable eventual fall guy for all of this nonsense, Stephen Miller.
When in our history have we tolerated unlawful riotous assemblies night after night around FBI buildings or ATF buildings or DEA buildings? This is the textbook definition of domestic terrorism.
When has the United States ever tolerated riotous assemblies around government buildings?
He has just returned to the White House and is signing a series of executive actions in the Oval Office, where he is pardoning some 1,500 January 6 rioters who have been convicted for participating in the attack on the Capitol 4 years ago.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We turn now to another wrap of the week, as our next highlight comes from Thursday's edition of The Briefing. Paris Fashion Week came to a close on Tuesday, with multiple debuts rounding up a busy month of fashion weeks around the world. And though we've covered some of those highlights individually, we couldn't resist the opportunity to bring our fashion experts who have been in Paris for all of the action into our studio here in Midori House for one more look. Monocle's Chris Chermak was joined by the editor of Confect magazine, Sophie Grove, for a look back on some of her highlights.
Sophie, good to have you back here.
Lovely to be here.
The last time we spoke with you was from a train platform just before you returned from Paris to London.
That was, very much the Fashion Express. I mean, half of that Eurostar train were people who'd been in the audience with me on Monday night at the Chanel Mathieu Blasi debut, and so we were packed onto that train. It was quite a cast, it had to be said.
I love that, actually. Did you have any discussions on the train? I mean, is that one way to reflect, or are people like looking back and sort of
Well, fashion people don't tend to chat to each other all that much. It's kind of the vibe is a little bit devil wears Prada occasionally, but actually the woman I sat next to was very charming, and also she was crocheting as she kind of sort of went into the tunnel, which I thought was a very elegant kind of crafty moment there.
Amazing, crocheting as she went into the tunnel. This is sort of the fashion Eurostar.
Yeah, the craft frontier.
So what did you make? I mean, we did speak about this on Tuesday just after you had attended the show on Monday. Was that the highlight for you? I mean, there were so many debuts over the last few weeks and also in Paris, but that one really seemed to put a crown on everything, didn't it?
I mean, it was such an incredible show, and I think the hype and the kind of expectation, that sense of suspense was so kind of, in a way, kind of driving the momentum towards that very moment on Monday night when we stepped into the Grand Palais, and there's this incredible space kind of themed set on these planets above, like these zeppelins, and then this wonderful collection from Mathieu Blasi, just a really beautiful poetic reimagining of some of the Chanel codes, and I think what in a sense, now we've had a few days to kind of digest this, people are starting to think, how is he really going to make his mark on the house? What will the next collections be like? What will his immediate impact be on sales? Because these collections won't go into the stores and for a while yet. But I think it's such a wonderfully huge and beautiful network of artisans, houses, maisons. He brought in the shirt makers Chavray to make these beautiful shirts that were very fresh in the show. But that underneath the umbrella, this sort of like amazing métier d'art umbrella that Chanel has been growing over the past 20 years is just such an incredible network of artisans, and it's just interesting to see what he'll do next and how that will impact who's buying the brand. Will they seduce another generation?
So, I mean, you had Mathieu Blazy of Chanel, you had obviously Jonathan Anderson, Dior. Those were sort of the very big ones of the last few weeks. I'm curious also in general, I guess, when you have these big unveilings, in some ways they're competing houses, competing against each other, but they're also creating such a buzz about fashion at a place like this. I mean, are they complementing each other in that way?
I think so. I mean, I don't think I can remember a time where there's been so much excitement about fashion in the kind of, in the wild, in the general public. In Paris, they had these huge screens up just in town. People were watching the shows. There's a real chatter about, it's not just the industry insiders that are talking about this kind of amazing generational shift we're seeing at the top of all these different brands. And I think, Dema at Gucci had a really great kind of little glimpse of what he's going to do, just with a capsule collection and a kind of little sort of moment of a filmic moment at Milan Fashion Week. But I think somebody like him is really good at engaging the customer on so many different levels, and also creating that moment of real interest from across the board, not just the fashionistas, not just the people who are going to know all the kind of nuance and kind of tiny little details. There is this sort of wonderful secret code where people can read an outfit, read a brand without seeing necessarily too much of the branding. But actually, how do you really kind of disseminate into the market and make that impact on sales and make that impact on the kind of momentum of the company for the long term?
And you bring up Milan there. We've had New York, London, Milan, Paris in the last few weeks. It is such a stretch run for September. I guess kind of similar question to, say, Anderson, Dior and Chanel. I mean, do all these fashion weeks complement each other? Do they in themselves build excitement, even if they're, again, in some ways competing against each other too?
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you look back, I think we saw a really strong London Fashion Week, and London was really repositioning itself, as a place of true creativity. We're putting out so many talented people into the industry from this city. And I think it was interesting to see that kind of repositioning. We have a new CEO at the London British Fashion Council. So I think that's a really interesting moment. And then you could see that competition is good for the industry, and the sense of strength in all the fashion weeks, really high caliber shows, real sense of creative, theatrical engagement. I think it helps the whole industry to strive. So, of course, there is that competition across the groups, across, Chanel, Dior, these big sort of wonderful titanic competitors. But at the same time, they know that they have to, spur each other on and create excellence across all of the different houses.
And it is so interesting, as you discussed there, the theatrical elements of this and the way that reaches out to the public. You have screenings in Paris. So that's one side of the fashion weeks. But then also, as you touched on a little bit, the next step is kind of how this then translates to retail, how this translates to the actual fashion market, what people are going to see on the shelves in stores. Tell me a little more about that. Where do we go from here?
Well, what I really loved about Mathieu Blazy's collections is they just were so wearable. Chanel, really has always been about comfort to some extent, these wonderful jackets that move with the body. And I think some of his pieces are so sort of covetable. You could see the audience yearning to kind of just snatch them up and put them on. You could integrate them into your life. So I think there is a sense that how his reimaginings of these classic pieces going to seduce the Chanel customer. They still want those iconic pieces. And I think that was a really interesting thing to reflect on. And across the collections, there was this sense. I was at Céline earlier in the week, which was in this beautiful sort of national park just outside Paris, in fact, in a forest. And there, Michael Ryder, the new-ish creative director, because he's already had one sort of debut, and this is his second collection. It was just this wonderful sense of just being the best dressed woman in the room. These amazing jackets, this beautiful tailoring. There's a return to this wonderful, wonderful suiting across the board. And I think that wearability is still really important and will impact sales. And it is about having pockets. It is about being able to just throw something on. This easy, beautiful, elevated elegance that we're seeing isn't overly branded, but it is very, very important to the modern woman. And I think that will really impact sales. And there's a real understanding that that's important.
Sophie Grove there, editor of Confect magazine, in conversation with Chris Chermak earlier this week. You're listening to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. One of Shakespeare's greatest masterpieces, King Lear, tells a story of family conflict, power, age, and loss. This classic play is currently being staged in Tokyo by British theatre maker Philip Bring, and it marks the first Japanese production under his direction, offering a fresh, contemporary take on the tragedy. Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi spoke with Philip in Tokyo.
My name is Philip Breen. I'm the director and adapter of the Bunkamura production of King Lear, the Kabuki-cho, in Shinjuku.
When directing King Lear for this Japanese play, what kind of things did you think about? And why do you think it's meaningful for Japanese audiences to see this play today?
Well, first of all, King Lear is relevant in any context. And lines like, "Oh, sir, you are old," the idea of an older generation holding on to money and power while a younger generation waits in the wings for its moment, feels very relevant to where I'm from, UK, but also I think is quite relevant here in Japan as well. And also, in terms of the world politics, the play deals with the king giving away his power, much like the way America has given up its role in the world, and into that vacuum have stepped a series of all kinds of actors for good and ill vying for power in the vacuum. So both on a sort of very personal, like the play always is, on a very personal, on a very domestic level, relevant to many contexts, most contexts, but particularly to Japan, and on a political level also to world politics for me at the moment, along with the idea of the rise of new kings around the world with huge power of life and death over people's lives. So we have a new age of kings that have huge power over people's lives, and a lot of the way in which these new kings get their power is to tell people that they shouldn't or don't need to see things that they don't want to see. Part of the reason we love these kings is because they tell us we don't have to do certain things, we don't have to see certain things, we don't have to look at certain things. And this is a play about seeing, looking, speaking, not speaking. And that feels relevant to, again, that's always relevant, but particularly relevant to a world political moment.
Since King Lear was written in English, what challenges did you face in staging the play in Japanese?
Well, I speak a bit of Japanese, very not amazing, but enough to have a conversation. So that's made things interesting. But also, I know the play. So, for example, I can hear the play in English in my head whilst watching the Japanese actors do it. And there are things I simply can't control. As I don't speak Japanese, I don't know the nuance of the language. But what I can say to the Japanese actors, well, this is what it's doing in English. This is what a line is doing in English. This is what I think Shakespeare's intention is. And so, what you always have is this very thorough act of translation, not just in terms of the text, but also in terms of the actors to the role and all the rest of it. And I find it, Shakespeare is a foreign language to a lot of English people as well. And so there's a very, but strangely, English actors or English theatre people assume they know Shakespeare really well. And so you kind of, maybe you imagine that the problem with directing abroad is that it makes it less clear, but in some ways it makes it more clear, because nothing is taken for granted in terms of our understanding of the word. And so we go through a very, very thorough thorough process. I've watched theatre all around the world in lots and lots of different languages, and I think anyone who goes to the theatre can see good acting regardless of the language and the context and the culture. Yeah, I watch it in a very different way, and my work has changed a lot as a result of working here in Japan. It's become, I'd say, maybe much more visual, more poetic maybe.
I think English and Japanese have very different rhythms. Did that change your approach to directing the play in Japanese?
Well, for example, in English, I might discuss, where stress lies in a word, or how to work to a line end. And of course, the sentence structure is entirely different in Japanese, with the verb at the end of the line. And as you can hear from the way I speak now, English barrels forward joyfully, and verbs are thrown in pell-mell. And so in some ways, it's a very good dramatic language in that sense. Japanese is, I think, instinctively much more considered, because we're always going towards always heading towards the verb. So there's a shape of the sentence in your head that you have in Japanese that maybe you don't have in English. So I don't really have the same sort of minute control of minutiae in the text that I would have directing it in English. But in some ways, that's no bad thing. I can hear rhythm. I can spot whether a moment is true or not. I can spot whether a moment is dramatic or interesting. And 9 times out of 10, if an actor is lost, or a very good actor is lost, it's because the translation isn't good. Or it's amazing to watch the power of a great play like King Lear on the actors, work its magic on these great Japanese actors. And if they get a bit lost, it's normally because we haven't quite got the translation right.
Thank you. So finally, about the cast. To me, as Japanese, many of them are very well-known Japanese actors. But King Lear is played by Shinobu Otake, a female actor, and the rest of the cast comes from different generations and different backgrounds. What do you think about these casting choices?
Well, the first thing's, on the world stage, it's not at all unusual for hundreds of years now for the greatest female actors of their day to attempt the greatest roles. Ellen Terry played Hamlet. Recently there have been a number of high-profile women actors playing Lear on the international stage. Glenda Jackson played it in London. In terms of the history of Shakespeare, great women actors taking on great roles is not at all unusual. And of course, the very first King Lear would have been a 34, 35-year-old man in Richard Burbage. And so Lear is always created to a degree. It's very rare that you would get a man in his mid-80s playing that role. And actually, in Japanese theatre culture, it has a lot of women playing men and men playing women, both in the classical form, but also on the contemporary stage as well.
For Monocle in Tokyo, I'm Ryuma Takahashi.
Still to come here on The Curator, we meet the authors responsible for a new book about one of the most extraordinary prisoner swaps in history. We stop off in Tbilisi, where a Soviet-era post office has been reborn as a sleek new hotel. And we head to Dubai for a tall story. Stay tuned.
Craft matters, in small ways, like how a coffee is brewed, and in not-so-small ways, like how your money is cared for, which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft, tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies, all happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the heart of it all. UBS, banking is our craft.
You are with The Curator, our weekly highlight show here on Monocle Radio, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. On August 1st in 2024, one of the most extraordinary prisoner swaps in history between Russia, the US, Germany and other allies took place on the tarmac of an airport in Turkey. Among the 26 people exchanged were Russian spies, dissidents and American prisoners, including the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Two of Gershkovich's colleagues at the journal, Drew Hinshaw and Joe Parkinson, have written about the murky world of prisoner exchanges in a new book called Swap, A Secret History of the New Cold War. They spoke to Monocle's Chris Chermak, who began by asking Joe about how Evan has been doing since his release.
Evan is doing amazingly well. especially considering everything that he's been through. I think it was very special for us at the Wall Street Journal to watch the way that he seemed to be dealing with, and those images from inside the glass cage in a Moscow courthouse, just how positive and stoic he seemed to be in that kind of unimaginable situation. He's been busy writing his memoir. It's going to be absolutely unmissable, coming out next summer, as far as we're aware. And he also, when he came out of prison, the one story that he worked on, we were lucky enough to work on it with him. And that was where he managed to identify the individuals that took him. And our book actually opens with this great swap, this historic swap on the tarmac in Turkey. And of course, Evan was able to understand and identify who those individuals were. So it's something probably unparalleled in journalism, that somebody gets abducted by a foreign state, has to serve time in jail, then comes out as a journalist and identifies the people who were responsible.
Drew, Evan and his story was such a reason for writing this book, of course, but how much did you actually know about this whole modern day post-Cold War, return to Cold War spy game that was underway before you started researching all of this?
This became for us a window into how the world really works. We had one colleague taken and set out, we were asked by the paper to do the investigative work of understanding why he'd been taken, what the game that was being played here was. And very quickly we realized that this was at the heart of the US-Russia relationship, that Russia was stockpiling Americans, a history teacher, former Marines, basketball player Brittany Griner, our friend Evan, other journalists. And what Russia wanted with these prisoners was to trade them for spies, deep cover illegal spies based in Slovenia, a murderer based in Germany, various hackers and cyber criminals held in America. In some ways, this is a return to the Cold War because we all saw the spy swaps where, spies cross each other in East Germany on the bridge in Berlin. But that was spies for spies. What was really piratical and frightening was Russia was playing a game where it was exchanging basically ordinary, if notable, Americans for spies and even a murderer. And that was a threshold that had never been crossed, even in the Cold War.
Drew, you and your colleagues obviously found yourself at the center of this, not only investigating, as you described it, you were sort of set out to investigate why Evan was taken, but then there is also this whole campaign rallying support for him, securing his release. And this is also such a strange element of this world, the fact that different prisoners and their families are having to campaign on their own behalf, raising their own cases, profiles. Was there an understanding at the Journal that kind of maintaining pressure, the profile of this case was almost directly linked to whether Evan would be released or not?
That is one of the strangest things about this modern game of hostage trading, of bartering in prisoners, is that there is really no comparison to the power of a family member or someone's friends to go out there and humanize them. We've embarked in this world thinking this is a world of CIA spies meeting FSB officers and back alleys in the Middle East and other places. And to some extent it is. But it's also a story of ordinary Americans who woke up one morning to find out that their loved one was in prison and having to go out there and figure out how to convince their government and the Russian government to do a deal. What's really unusual is that at the end of the day, these people, siblings, mothers, were able to get the US and Russia under one page and bring about the largest prisoner exchange in history last August.
I would just add to that and say that one of the really fascinating things about this world, and it's this hidden world of diplomacy that lurks just beneath the surface. There are these extraordinary characters everywhere. We've alluded to a few of them already in this conversation, the deep cover spies, the ordinary families. They're really the heart and soul of the book. People trying to navigate complicated bureaucracies and compete with much bigger institutions to try and bring their loved ones home. But also in this space are a bunch of people you would never expect to find. Celebrities, some of the top, executives from Silicon Valley, playing a back channel role, often moving messages between Moscow and Washington at a time where the countries obviously have become much, much more antagonistic. It is really a spy thriller that we didn't expect to find, but a spy thriller with all of these kind of contemporary characteristics of sort of celebrity culture for the internet age.
The investigative reporters Drew Hinshaw and Joe Parkinson there, speaking to Chris Chermak earlier this week. Next, we hop across the Russian border and head to Tbilisi, where a Soviet-era post office has been reborn as a sleek new telegraph hotel, blending history with modern hospitality. Here, Monocle's Chiara Rimella explores how the building's transformation reflects Georgia's booming tourism scene.
It might not feel like it when you're stuck in a queue to drop off a parcel that could not be returned by courier, but there was, of course, a time when post offices were buildings that represented the future. It's not by chance that autocratic governments like Italy's fascist dictatorship built monumental, hulking structures to house their central postal hubs. The Sicilian capital of Palermo's is a case in point. Its square structure and tall frontal columns, completed in the 1930s, make it look like a temple to the cult of technology and modern efficiency. Perhaps it's because of the fact that I grew up in Italy, surrounded by architectural mementos of a past that many wish hadn't happened but nobody can forget, that I wasn't too surprised by Tbilisi's mixed urban fabric when I got to the city. In the capital of Georgia, many reminders of a complicated political history date back to Soviet times. The city is full of brutalist buildings. Some of these imposing grey towers are clearly better kept than others. But it's perhaps again no surprise that one of the most striking, iconic examples of this architecture in town should be a former post office. Set on the thunderously busy, uber-central Rustaveli Avenue, the building was first designed and constructed in the 1970s, conceived by architects Lado Alexei Meshkishvili and Teimuraz Mikashavidze. The former was a prolific architect in Georgia's Soviet times. His other projects in the capital include the saucer-like sports palace and the squat, linear chess palace and alpine club. Like most Soviet buildings in the modernist style, the post office was a solid, square, bulky structure or perpendicular lines. The windows sat in a neat grid, and there was very little room for ornamentation, and yet there was something stately about the place, and not just because of its enormous size. Its regimented poise gave it almost a look of a museum, helped perhaps by the fact that this was no cement construction. The exterior facade was covered in Bolnisi tuff, the same stone that gives most of the historical buildings in the rest of the city, including the Georgian parliament nearby, their golden hue. Back when it was opened, this place was more than just a public office. It was a point of connection with the rest of the world, a hub where people who didn't yet have access to phones could come, make calls and send telegrams, and experience that technology for themselves. Residents gravitated here for errands and news until the building eventually lost its function and was slated for redevelopment in 2013. It took quite a long time for a new project to emerge from its disused skeleton, but if you head to Tbilisi today, you'll see the tough facade as polished and clean as it could be. As of this year, the building has begun its new life as a telegraph hotel, a luxury hotel managed by real estate arm of investment group Silk Road Group. World-famous Shanghai-based architectural practice Narian Hu were called in for the spruce-up. Their idea was to maintain the building's appearance as much as possible, at least on the exterior. Inside, they have brought a minimalist approach to the hotel's 239 rooms, but they were particularly keen to keep a sense of exchange that they believe was the original spirit of the place. That means floor-to-ceiling windows at ground level so that passers-by can catch a glimpse of what's going on inside and feel enticed by its restaurants, which include an accomplished spot by Parisian-based Thai-born chef Rose Chalalai Singh called Lan Thai. The team hopes that this private meets public predicament will become even truer when, as the project progresses, the square in front of the hotel will be turned into a greener, more pedestrianised space than the de facto open-air parking lot it is now. Perhaps it's no coincidence that as Georgia experiences a remarkable tourism boom, this building has once again come to represent the future. Not one of cordless communications, but of real estate investment and hospitality developments, which are popping up around Tbilisi and beyond. Who knows what its next futuristic incarnation will be. For Monocle in Tbilisi, I am Chiara Rimella.
Thank you very much, Chiara Rimella there. Stay on the theme of architecture and design now for our next highlight. For this week's installment of Monocle Design Extra, Emma Nelson stopped off in Austria's St. Wolfgang station. In addition to being the starting point for the Schaffberg Cog Railway, it has also received accolades from the highest levels of the architectural community. Here is Emma.
The Salzkammergut region of Austria is deliriously pretty. You can count the ways. 70 lakes, at least 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, alpine pastures and lots of mountains. Nature excels here in its beauty. Its charms have attracted the great, as Mario Michelin, who runs the Salzburg Tourism Company, now explains.
So Emperor Franz Josef lived about 84 years, and 80 years of his life, it's 4 months he lived and do everything here in Salzkammergut. He invited other emperors and other peoples to come to visit him, and he showed them the most beautiful things in Salzkammergut. And one of the most beautiful things is the Schafberg mountain. Before they built the Cork Railway, there were the Sesselträger, yes, 4 peoples carrying on a chair the honorary people up to the mountain. It was like a taxi, yes.
This was clearly neither a comfortable or practical way of doing things. Mario, a former train driver turned CEO with an excellent ponytail, explains how they decided that after all they needed an easier way. And so the idea of a railway was hatched.
So in June 1892, they start to build this track up, and 4 months later, it's crazy, 14 months later, on the 1st of August, the first train goes up with the first passengers.
When you look at the Schafberg...
Famous. It was really famous, and it was marvelous that they built this track up. Because there were 300 of Italian workers, 100 Maulesel, and some black powder for the track. And everything what they built in the track, they took from the mountain.
And so you climb on board for a 6-kilometre journey beyond the tree line. No cars, no donkeys. This is not an express service. Drawing out of the station at little more than walking pace, the incline pulls you into the back of your wooden bench. First within touching distance of people's back lawns, then woodland forest, and finally the blasted peak of the Schafberg. Whatever grows up there does so at a wind-swept angle. Your ears pop. Slowly. The temperature slides. You hope the brakes are good. You ask yourself if you really want to look down. In peak season, the service can send more than 2,500 passengers per day up and down the Schafberg, from busloads of locals to coaches of South Koreans. This is one of the treasures of Austrian tourism. Once you reach the top, if you like fresh air and bracing views and stillness like nowhere else on earth, you're in the right place. You can see 11 of Austria's lakes from up here. But there's something even more remarkable. At the very edge of a plunging, pointed precipice, there's a hotel. Austria's first mountain hotel.
You don't believe it. The hotel was built 30 years before the track was built. So the hotel was built in 1862. And the train track was built in 1893. So this is fantastic. They everything carry up with manpower and with some donkeys.
This is absolutely buzzing with tour guides and locals who seem to have come up on a Thursday morning for a large glass of beer.
Wir sind 2. Zu zweit? Jawohl, schauen wir. Schönes Platz am Fenster. Gut, ihr habt Zeit.
Inside, the cosiest, warmest retreat. Thick stone walls, thick wooden benches, thick horned hunting trophies eyeballing you from the wall as you demolish thick slices of strudel, sausage and unctuous bowls of goulash. Up here, everybody is smiling, and elevensies never felt so good. It's mid-morning. What have you ordered?
A glass of wine. And a bratwurst.
Well, we're staying at a hotel that's on the water, and you look up at the top of the mountain, and there's this restaurant and hotel and the train going up there, and so we just couldn't resist. So here we are.
A trip back down the mountain and to the Schafbergbahn's second design miracle, the railway station. A tiny hut in front of which you queued in the rain has now vanished, and in its place, a vast, light and bright visitor centre.
My name is Michael Höcketstaller, and I'm co-founder of Dunkelschwarz Architects. And I was the leading architect at this project during the building and the planning phase.
In 2019, a young firm of Salzburg architects, Dunkelschwarz, won the commission to revamp the station at the lakeside base. Their challenge was to create a large modern space which would also fit harmoniously into the mountainside.
We take a look at the special buildings, the existing buildings over there, which are located at a very beautiful landscape site between the Lake Wolfgang and the mountain Schafberg. But the buildings which existed were old and it didn't even work in its function.
No comparable model for a multi-use building existed in the local traditional Austrian architecture. The landscape itself is also protected, so they used wood and steel to create a jagged shed roof, breaking up the building's scale. Panoramic views strongly link the lakeside to the mountainside via the train track, and the space is grand enough to hold a wedding, warm enough to find a cosy corner to consult the timetable for the pleasure boat home as well. Everywhere you look, there are elegant solutions, and then something remarkable happened. The railway station that was designed to blend in was noticed globally. Here's Mario.
So in autumn last year, I became an email from the Prix Versailles that we are nominated for the best station in the world. And I first read this, a second time read it, and then I thought, it's a joke. This little station here in St. Wolfgang, the word title of the best architect station. And then I go to Google, what is the Prix Versailles? Yeah. And then I see, hey, is this famous?
The Schafbergbahn had been nominated in the category of the world's most beautiful railway station, so Michael and Mario went to Paris to the ceremony at UNESCO.
The other nominated projects in the category of the stations were like Grand Central Station in New York and a station in Melbourne and Neapel. Then there was a small railway station in St. Wolfgang. Probably nobody knew where is St. Wolfgang actually in comparison to the other big cities in the whole wide world. The planner teams of the other projects, they came to this ceremony and went to the stage with like 10 people. And because we didn't expect to win it, so we just came, Mario and me, we just two people. And then we won the gold medal and went to the stage. And we were, of course, very surprised and very happy. The big thing for us, that our work was so visible across the borders of Austria due to the world, we felt a big honor for that.
Nature has bestowed the Wolfgangsee with enough gifts that it doesn't need to advertise, but it now has another treasure, officially the most beautiful railway station in the world. For Monocle, in the Salzkammergut, I'm Emma Nelson.
And finally, on today's show, we turn to a building which has been towering over Dubai's Sheikh Zayed Road since 1974. It's much loved by residents, but many would struggle to call it by its official name. It's referred to almost exclusively by the name of the automobile company whose billboard sat atop it for almost 40 years. Monocle's Gulf correspondent Inzaman Rashid tells us how an advertising partnership shaped the identity of a burgeoning Dubai.
You're drifting down Sheikh Zayed Road, Dubai's arterial spine, just as evening begins its slow descent. Steel, glass and dust converge in a riot of warm light and deepening shadow. Looming above the cacophony, distinctive even amongst the towers, is a 15-storey concrete block, modest beside its glimmering neighbours, holding court at the defence roundabout. This is what locals have always known simply as the Toyota Building. Off the official books, it's the Nasser Rashid Luta Building, completed in 1974, mere years after the UAE formed in 1971. So modest, so quietly bold, an early residential tower long before the Burj Khalifa eclipsed it, long before downtown Dubai became a wonderland of inspiration. Architecturally, it's unassuming, some would say plain. The facade is punctured with small, regular windows, deeply set to keep interiors cool in the years before central air conditioning. The concrete is sun-bleached, worn by decades of desert winds. Along its skin, rows of external AC units cling like urban barnacles, evidence of incremental upgrades in a city otherwise addicted to shiny newness. And yet, its presence is undeniable. In a landscape now dominated by glass towers and shimmering facades, this block still announces itself with a kind of stubborn honesty. The interiors are modest, apartments refurbished over the decades but never luxurious. Residents prize not so much the fittings as the location. A two-bedroom flat rents for a fraction of the cost of neighbourhood skyscrapers, making it one of the last affordable footholds on Sheikh Zayed Road. On the ground floor, daily life unfolds in miniature. There's a gym, a flower shop, a barber, a grocery, businesses that serve tenants rather than tourists. The building has always been more residential than glamorous, a quiet reminder that even in hyper-modern Dubai, people still need laundry services and a place to buy bread. But what made this block into an icon wasn't the architecture, it was a sign. In 1981, an enormous Toyota billboard was hoisted onto its roof. Bright, bold, and glowing red and white, it quickly became more than advertising. It was a beacon. By day, it reflected the desert sun. By night, it cast its neon glow across the highway. Generations of commuters and taxi drivers used it as a point of orientation. Meeting a friend? I'll see you by the Toyota Building. For decades, it was as much a wayfinder as the roundabouts themselves. And then, in May 2018, the sign was removed. The advertising contract had expired. One morning, drivers glanced up and saw only bare sky above the concrete. The reaction was immediate, if understated. Not outrage exactly, but a kind of sadness. Local newspapers ran stories about its absence. Residents remarked that without the sign, the building needs a new name. For a city so often accused of transience, this was proof of attachment. People realized how much the logo had become part of Dubai's visual heritage. For 4 years, the building stood exposed, stripped of its crown, and then, in June 2022, the logo returned. Not one, but two signs, Toyota in English facing one direction, and in Arabic facing the other. When the switch was flicked, the skyline felt whole again. Toyota UAE even organised a photo walk to mark the occasion, encouraging residents to revisit the neighbourhood with disposable cameras to document both the sign and the city that had grown around it. The gesture acknowledged something rare, that in Dubai, where towers rise and fall with breathtaking speed, continuity matters. Urbanists like Yasser El-Sheshtawi have argued that the Toyota Building deserves protection, not because it's beautiful, but because it is memory made concrete. In a city where so much is new, its endurance tells another story of the mid-1970s, of the early ambitions of a small Gulf state, of how residents attached meaning to a neon logo. Today, it's easy to overlook. Sheikh Zayed Road bristles with icons, the twisting KN Tower, the soaring Burj Khalifa in the distance, the vast Dubai frame glinting on the horizon. Against that skyline, the Toyota Building looks almost modest, but listen to the affection in the way people still talk about it. For many, it is as synonymous with Dubai as the creek, the Abra boats, or the airport arrivals hall. And so, once more, the red glow returns each evening, flickering above 15 stories of aging concrete. Below, life continues. Residents carry shopping bags, children darting into the lifts, a florist arranging stems in buckets of water. Above, the sign holds steady, reminding everyone hurtling along Sheikh Zayed Road that cities are built not just on steel and glass, but on the landmarks we quietly choose to love.
And Zaman Rashid there with that report. And well, that's all I've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by Sanimpi and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the programs here on Monocle Radio. Thank you for listening.